For more on that and the latest on the investigation, I want to turn to Payam Akhavan. Now, he's a professor of international law at McGill University and a former UN prosecutor at The Hague. He joins me now from our Montreal studio. So, Professor, thank you so much for making time for us. Let's begin with the Canadian government's announcement that they will be providing $25,000 for families of the Iranian plane crash and their victims, and all of this to assist in funeral arrangements and with travel. What do you make of Canada's response?
I think it is a generous, compassionate and humanitarian gesture on the part of the Canadian government, which comes in addition to the tremendous outpouring of sympathy and the sharing of grief throughout Canada. And I can tell you that we in the Iranian community in Canada are exceptionally grateful to the government and the people for their solidarity in this very difficult time. But I think we have to bear in mind, as the Prime Minister said, that these payments are not a substitute for the compensation that the Iranian government owes to the victims. And in addition, we still have to ensure that there is a proper investigation so that we can discover the truth and get to the bottom of what happened.
Now, you've mentioned the investigation, and that's an interesting aspect because, of course, Canada has repeatedly said they want a thorough and transparent investigation. We know the person who's in charge of the investigation is the Judiciary Chief, Ibrahim Raisi. Now, what do you know of this man?
Ibrahim Raisi is a notorious figure implicated in the mass execution of some 5,000 political prisoners in the summer of 1988. He was a member of a so-called death commission that held summary trials in Iran's prisons in the summer of 1988. He personally interrogated some of the victims who were sent out to be executed. The Canadian Parliament has found that the events of 1988 constitute crimes against humanity. So instead of leading an investigation, Mr. Raisi should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity before the International Criminal Court. And it's very difficult to believe that under his leadership there will be a credible, thorough and transparent investigation.
So what do you recommend the Canadian government should do?
Well, I think for now the Canadian government has to be patient, and we need to ensure first and foremost that those who have gone to Iran to retrieve the remains of their loved ones are not harmed. And in fact, some of them have already been intimidated and harassed by the authorities. It's very frequent that in Iran, the families of victims, instead of receiving justice, are harassed and intimidated. But I think that once the question of the repatriation of the remains of the victims has been resolved, if Iran is not going to conduct a proper investigation, and if it is not going to provide adequate compensation, then Canada should raise the matter before the UN agency responsible, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization right here in Montreal. That, in fact, is exactly what Iran did in 1988 when Iran Air Flight 655 was shot by the USS Vincennes, a US warship in the Persian Gulf. So I'm afraid that the struggle for justice will take a very long time, and I'm very pleased that the government has indicated its resolve and determination to get justice for the victims' families.
Okay, sir, I want to thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
That was former UN prosecutor Payam Akhavan. He's joining us from our Montreal studio.